All right, everybody. We should be live for our next game dev interview here on the Game Wisdom channel. I am Josh Placer, and we have another very interesting one lined up. My guest tonight is from the studio Heart Shaped Games, and they are currently working on the very interesting title We Are the Caretakers, which combines multiple genres and game mechanics into something very unique. We had a chance to play this about I want to say like 3, 4 months ago, and the lead designer and founder is on to talk about the game. So please welcome to the cast, Scott Brodie. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
Yep, it's a pleasure to have you on. It we just set things up a few days ago, and it's always great to have a new guest on, and especially to talk about a game that is very unique and different, like We Are the Caretakers.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to chat about it, and yeah, I'm glad that you had a chance to check it out. And we are definitely trying to do something unique, but I think it's turning out pretty good so far.
Oh yes, and we're definitely going to be talking about that over our cast today. And for people joining us live, if you have any questions about the game or for design for Scott, definitely leave them in the comments and we will get to them. So, since this is your first time on the cast, could you talk a little bit about your background and kind of what is We Are the Caretakers?
Yeah, so I am the founder and creative director of Heart Shaped Games. Heart Shaped Games has been around making indie games for about 10 years, but I've been making games for about 18 total. I started out working, I guess my first big gig was with some AAA studios in Michigan, where we made PlayStation 2 action games like Alter Echo. And then I eventually went to work with Microsoft Game Studios in Seattle, primarily working on first party and third party Xbox Live Arcade games. So I ended up working on probably 20 different games across my couple of years there. And then I just decided to break off on my own and wanted to get my hands dirty with development. So I started out making a game called Hero Generations, which is a 4X strategy roguelike where every step is a year of your life. And we released that on Steam and eventually to iOS and Android. And then I also worked on a game called High Grounds, which is more of like a web CCG.
Okay.
And then, yeah, eventually, those were all sort of smaller projects, maybe 2 to 4 people at the most. And then now We Are the Caretakers is sort of our first bigger bet, if you want to call it bigger. We've been about 6 to 8 people, so really stepping it up. But no, it's been great to um, sort of be able to kind of take the vision we've had for the company and the types of games we want to make, and kind of do it in a sort of a bigger way. So We Are the Caretakers is, I guess we've been describing it as a squad management RPG where you're protecting sci-fi animals from poachers, and eventually you learn an alien invasion. And so it's based around sort of a anti-poaching metaphor, set in an Afrofuturist world, and you manage this organization called the Caretakers, where you have this kind of ragtag group of characters that you form into squads and send out into the field. And then, obviously we can talk more about the specifics of the design, but once you are out in the field and you find another poaching unit, it kind of goes into a JRPG turn-based combat. So we're blending a lot of different genres, but yeah, I think that's the high level of We Are the Caretakers.
All right. And yeah, definitely a lot there. And when did you guys start first coming up with We Are the Caretakers? How long have you been developing it for?
So I think the original idea and trying to get the project underway started about 3 years ago, and core development has been going for a little over 2 years now. Yeah, the sort of seed started talking with one of my friends, James Pita, who had some connections to anti-poaching or just this world through developing AI to help kind of these conservationists kind of track movements of poachers and animals and things like that. So he kind of came to me saying, "Hey, I know you do these kind of interesting strategy games. I'd love to find a way to like build something around this topic, and is there interest? And so we kind of started from that seed, and then I just I joke and say like, okay, well, that sounds good, but why don't we put aliens and robots and all that stuff into it to kind of make it a very interesting thing to engage with, but ultimately kind of through play start to engage with that topic. So I think that's where the core seed was at, and then just feeling out, trying to meet collaborators. I met Xavier Nelson Jr., who's our narrative director at GDC one year, and he really helped shape how we could actually achieve that. And then Anthony Jones, who is our art director, really started the spark with his concepts of all his amazing character designs and everything you can see in some of our recent trailers.
Okay. And with something like We Are the Caretakers, with the various mechanics and systems you guys have come up with, so like I said, I had a chance to play it a few months ago, and I guess in terms of settling on the designs, you said like you kind of like with your company, you wanted to kind of focus on these unique strategy games or these unique mechanics. I guess how I guess into or how starting into development did you come up with or settled on what you wanted the gameplay loop of the game to be?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting in that I think we started from a research standpoint. So what is the space like? What does a ranger do in the field? What are the complications that they have to do? And you quickly realize when you do that research, and eventually we actually got to meet and see some of these folks in action and really learn about what they're doing. And so we kind of said, how can we distill this experience into a game? And I quickly settled on, and maybe my brain just goes this way because I'm obsessed with this game, but there was a really an older strategy game called Ogre Battle, March of the Black Queen for Super Nintendo. I don't know if this is a deep cut, so I don't know if you've ever heard of it before.
Oh, yes, I have.
Oh, wonderful. I should expect nothing less. But yeah, so this is a game that I've just always wanted to kind of modernize and explore because it was something that I spent a lot of time with, and it just seemed to map really well. It's you have a lot of people with different skill sets trying to come together, covering a lot of ground, and then when you are out there and you finally encounter someone, then you have to figure out how do you diffuse the situation and think about it more from beyond just in a traditional RPG where you're just gonna bash them and kill them and get your XP and level up. You really have to think about how can we look at maybe diffusing the situation and maybe realizing that some of these people who are poaching are members of the community, and how you treat them will have a wider impact on your overall impact. And so something like Ogre Battle, which if folks aren't familiar, has a similar type thing where you're building squads and you send them out into this kind of RTS with pause field. They also have this idea of like a running reputation score. So all of your actions are sort of measured and kind of kept track of, and the folks take notice in that game of the actions you take, and that will affect the types of characters you can recruit, the types of resources you'll get and that type of thing. And I just really felt that fit the model we wanted because you are both trying to functionally stop poachers and track them and things like that, but then you're also managing this community and there's just a range of factors, and that felt like a good base to start from. So really, that's a long-winded way of saying that, I kind of looked at some of these games like Ogre Battle, also something like a Darkest Dungeon, where you're having this kind of ensemble cast and trying to kind of fit them to help you achieve a goal. Mm-hmm. And from there, we kind of evolved it to our setting. Okay.
Now, one thing that is mentioned on the kind of the marketing for it is that this game takes place in an Afrofuturist setting, and I'm not too familiar with that term, and I think a few of the people who are watching weren't. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so it's a genre of sci-fi. I think a lot of people will think of something like Black Panther that just came out recently, where you have something rooted in African landscapes and just sort of exploring, yeah, future settings, sci-fi settings with that backdrop. So there are a lot of other great works that I've been a fan of. There's a lot of authors like Nnedi Okorafor, who made a book called Who Fears Death, and the Binti series. And so I think as we started to look at the topic and the wanting to be true to the folks that we were meeting, doing the work in the field, it felt like a great way to sort of give us a setting that was separate from a real world place with real world people, but still feel true and representative of that. So ultimately, Xalavir on our team and Anthony kind of latched on to that possibility and put together some great world building and concepts for us.
Okay. And a question from chat. Mr. Elrud asked, had Hero Generation paid for this game, or had you looked for outside funding for it?
Yeah, so this game is has some funding, some external funding, yeah.
Okay.
But we're still an independent company. It's just around this project. Hero Generations did pretty well considering the smaller size, and we did a Kickstarter for Hero Generations that helped us kind of take it from the smaller prototype to a more polished game. But no, this all of our other games were self-funded but this one is the first time we've kind of taken some significant external funding.
All right. Now, with kind of the design of We Are the Caretakers, and as you said, like you were basing this a lot on kind of stopping animal poaching and doing conservation like that. And we've seen from the independent space developers who try to, take either a message from the real world or deal with some kind of real life situation, such as this war of mine being another very big example of that. I guess with We Are the Caretakers, like, how do you approach a topic like this? Like, we've seen there's always that line you have to walk between either glorifying an action or being so caught up in the gameplay or the mechanics that, the real life issue sometimes gets downplayed by what's going on with the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously been a core discussion point. I think fundamentally, we very much took one of the things we said internally a lot was like we wanted to avoid this like edutainment sort of bent, right? Like where you start out with a message and it's sort of an educational thing, but that's not what we were doing. We are a a systems driven, exciting, interesting sci-fi world that just so happens to have this different setting. I would say I always look at things from a systems perspective and think about how do we take a lot of the layers on top of it and just get down to, okay, what are the dynamics at play? And so that helped me just think about, okay, what is the gameplay that naturally stems from this? And so it's tracking, it's de-escalating. How do we turn that into a game? And I think that by building from that, the overall game feels true, but doesn't necessarily have to deal with, I guess, as much of the surface things that might be more problematic when you're starting to look at like real geopolitical conflicts or some of the nuances of the topic, I guess. So I would definitely say letting the game kind of speak for itself versus preaching is kind of the general bent of things.
Okay. And as you said a few minutes ago, part of the game is about like de-escalating these situations, kind of dealing with the local people, and I saw some of that during the demo that we had a chance to play. So in terms of I guess long-term play of We Are the Caretakers, and again, we get into spoiler territory, definitely feel free to say it, but how do your actions or consequences come back to affect the game?
Yeah, so a really good example is you encounter, a poacher, a local boss, or even just a small group of civilians that have, made a choice because they're hungry or whatever the scenario might be. You enter into an encounter and you have basically characters that have abilities that can either affect character stamina or character will, and um, the general, I guess, effect of each of these abilities is to lower one of those stats and to wear them down to sort of a critical state. And you can be more aggressive, and that will affect more of their physical stamina, and you can be a little bit more forceful, or you can try to like break them down mentally, if you think about the metaphor, and use those types of abilities. And then once you get to a critical state, each character, based upon their class, will have different what we call like finishing moves. So we probably need a better word, a better description than that. But effectively, how are you going to resolve this character? And some of them are straightforward, like you'll detain them and you'll see them back in your headquarters after the mission. You could bribe them to kind of just like go away. You can try to recruit them even, which is pretty hard. There's all these different sort of ways you can decide to handle this, and those choices have different consequences. So, if you let a poacher go, but that helps protect the animal in the short term, you've sort of solved the mission scenario, but it may affect your long-term reputation. It may make future missions have more aggressive poachers from the same faction of that unit you let go, that type of thing. And then functionally, you have lots of these situations either through a narrative moment or an encounter moment, or visiting a town that you're trying to secure. All these things can affect your reputation. And then when you go back to sort of your HQ, which I guess for folks that haven't seen the game is not dissimilar from something like an XCOM or Darkest Dungeon, where you can kind of reorganize your characters, upgrade them, equip them, etc. One of the things we have in our game is something called like the atrium, where visitors can appear, and this is where the folks that you detained will be, and you can decide what to do with them. And this is also where like new recruits will be, and your recruits are affected. The recruits that appear are affected by your reputation value, and likewise the visitors may present different options for resolution based upon your reputation. So there's definitely this loop of like micro actions in the field affect your meta progression, back in HQ and through the campaign.
Okay. And to clarify for people watching, in terms of the campaign of We Are the Caretakers, is it a set map or set maps for each chapter, or does it kind of procedurally or randomly generate the space?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think for early access, so the short answer is it will definitely be more generated and random, but there are definitely some critical beats that you'll run into. So you'll hit these moments where, like early on in the game, the barrier comes down. You'll always kind of come back to that choke point mission. But fundamentally, the campaign is broken up into 4 to 6 eras, which are just groups of missions. And those missions all have a similar theme, but they are populated from archetypes that we've set up, and then can kind of be dynamically adjusted to match, whatever faction you're currently dealing with, or different scenarios based upon choices you've made in the past. So your goal is to try to survive through all of the eras without hitting the extinction of your fictional species called the Ron. But yeah, there's definitely going to be some dynamism in terms of the missions that you have, the objectives that are in those missions, and kind of the order of things. And in particular, the other characters are all sort of personalized and randomly generated with different traits and things like that.
All right. So you're kind of going for like maybe a short to moderately long campaign, but with the various factions and your choices, kind of keeping it feeling a little bit more dynamic on each playthrough.
Yeah, and the expectation is that the campaign will be a little bit shorter than your traditional one, but that you'll want to replay it in lots of different ways with different starting parameters, and being able to, I don't want to say hit all the content, because it's not like there's a set amount of content per se. But yeah, just being able to play through with different paths and making different choices and seeing different outcomes by the end of it.
Okay. And I guess one thing that we didn't really touch on, I definitely want to bring up, especially after you said ogre battle. That was just like piqued my ears when you said those two words when I read in the marketing for it. Is that kind of passive combat, or that it's not direct interaction? That in of itself could be a design cast because it's such a very unique way of playing these games with obvious pros and cons. So with like a passive combat system, was this something that you settled on relatively early into the development of We Are the Caretakers, or did this come about after like different iterations of combat?
I would definitely say different iterations. And actually, where we've currently landed is that we'll give you an option to potentially have more control over your individual unit's actions. We've kind of developing a hybrid system so that people can play the way they want to play. But fundamentally, the game is built around this more like auto battling or indirect control style. And the reason we were attracted to that is because it adds a layer of interest in terms of like the metaphor of the game where you're the leader and giving these indirect controls, and the fact that your caretaker group is sort of almost like a ragtag or thrown together group. And so this like slight lack of control and allowing the characters to act individually really appealed to me as just like another layer to the game where it's like, okay, this isn't these aren't people that are just brainless and will do everything you say. They, you have to account for their personalities, their quirks, and try to make the best and accomplish your goals with people coming together from different backgrounds, different, factions in the game, that sort of thing. So a theme of the game as you play through the campaign is realizing you're encountering all these different groups and you have to kind of bring them together literally in the story and in the mechanics of themselves of like, okay, I have to form them into groups and see how they can work together to accomplish this goal without getting us in too much trouble. So that's kind of where the overall bent of exploring the more indirect auto battle control came from.
Mm-hmm. And there's always that challenge with an auto battler system. Again, by the fact that if you don't have direct control, you can run into a situation where you're trying to target one character and your entire team was focusing on somebody else, which that happened to me many of times when we were playing Ogre Battle. Well, I just want to hit that one guy or hit that one leader, and of course they're all focusing on the big heavy guy instead. So
Yeah.
with like that in mind, I guess, did you take any steps or are there any elements in the mechanics to kind of keep things from getting maybe too long-winded in terms of a battle?
Yeah, well, I think the benefit in terms of like speed, like you're talking about, is the auto battle system where you can kind of get through things faster and not have to slog through, choosing the individual abilities, choosing your target every single time and having them drag on. And we wanted to have more encounters per mission. So that was definitely a concern. But I think more to your point about what level of control do you have to like make it feel like you're not totally just at the whims of the RNG. You have these AI controls that target your stance, which is something like aggressive or neutral or friendly or diplomatic, and that affects sort of what abilities your characters will tend to choose. And then you have a targeting strategy, which is, am I going to target, similar to Ogre Battle, the leader of the opposing unit? Am I going to target the strongest, weakest, etc.? So you have those kind of high level settings that give you that control. And then you have these sort of, get out of jail free resources that you can earn to say, if you're in a bad situation, but you just need to do some damage right now to get you out of this, you can earn supplies and sort of these special conductor abilities that you can use and consume to get you out of a bad situation. But those have consequences to them. So it's the game is more about like, okay, really think hard about your preparation and the units you put together, but you also have these sort of meta systems to help you manage situations that you just couldn't account for up front.
All right. Now, in terms of the class design, this is something that I got a chance to see just a little bit of during the demo. But as you said, there are a lot of different classes that you can kind of build and grow your teams to. Could you talk a little bit more about, I guess, kind of the structure that you wanted to go for in terms of the various classes?
Yeah, so we wanted you to be able to see a progression from, just a handful of citizens that want to do good to a, multinational, multi-faction organization as you go through the game. And so a big part is making decisions about how much you want to invest time into growing characters in the field, but there's always a cost to that. So to deploy them into the field, it'll cost you resources to do that, but hopefully they'll gain experience from doing activities. So that's the general interest and pull of the campaign is growing your characters. But the system with characters is basically that once they pass certain level thresholds, and if they meet the correct reputation requirements, they have like a personal tree based upon their class. So you have some base classes like diplomats and rangers, and then those can upgrade into, like, a ranger can specialize into a warrior or like a sniper, which is more of like a long range type character. And so yeah, we have I haven't counted in a while, but I think we're up to about 25 different unique classes. And then you can also recruit like special rare characters or characters from the other factions that aren't in the upgrade tree themselves, but provide very specific special strategic options.
All right. And as you were saying earlier, like in terms of your various actions, so you can do things a little more diplomatic or try to sap somebody's morale or will, or you can go straight up for physical or kill based attacks. And I'm sure the classes are set up to kind of reflect these different strategies.
Yeah, we've been finding through playtesting that it's ultimately best to give each of the classes some sort of ability in both the aggressive and more diplomatic spectrum, but some are better than others because you just don't want to be left entirely without an ability to, say, take a diplomatic strategy. But yeah, a lot of the characters are very sort of specialized, and then in combination you can get you can cover a lot of different bases or just be really effective in certain things. And I'm trying to think. So like, for example, I guess the other consideration that I wanted to bring up is that some characters can seem like very powerful, but they just cost a lot. And so sometimes it's not just how effective they are in balancing each class to be like equally effective in certain areas. It's do I want to like make an investment to like spend a lot of money and put this really powerful character out there versus conserving that to like prepare myself for situations that come up down the road. So a lot of the balance of the game has this extra layer of like, yeah, I could go in and like really ace this next level, but it might be costly and might require more resources than I realized, and that might hurt me down the road. So yeah, it's a very interesting, like effectively it's like a grand strategy game around running an organization, and there's lots of moving pieces and just trying to like kind of keep it all together where you don't have like full control over everything, but just being as prepared as possible for everything that could come up.
Okay. And a question came in a few minutes ago from Arlie, who asked, is there a log of the wildlife you encounter, similar to a Pokedex or something like that?
That's something that we really would like to have. I don't know if it'll make early access, but we would really like to let you keep track of like the individual characters and animals specifically, because we do want you to feel like attached to the animals in the game. They shouldn't just ultimately feel like a resource. They need to be characters with personalities, and you want to be invested in their welfare. So we hope through some of the systems, like where you can tag, like one of the mission types in the game is to go out and find some missing Ron and tag them so that you kind of can keep tabs on them and make sure you can check when they're in danger. And it would be great to do something like when you tag a unit, then you can then go back and check up on them, how they're doing, and kind of see their stats, even if they're not in a mission or a part of your group. So the answer is yes, we would love to do that, and we really want to put the caretaking part of our name, into the game as well.
All right. And to clarify, in terms of like character progression and growth, is there any element of permadeath or losing characters with your team?
Yeah, you can definitely lose them, and they can definitely get wounded. We try not to have permadeath per se, but what happens when a character is finished is that they are basically removed from the current mission, and then when you go back to the HQ, you can heal them, or they will heal themselves after like one mission. So you definitely have to do your best to take care of your characters. But yes, they're functionally, but maybe not thematically permadeath.
Okay. Now, you said a few minutes ago about kind of running the organization. That kind of gets into the XCOM style like influences. So with like that layer, or that kind of like persistent layer or geoscape layer, however you want to describe it, what does the player do in terms of managing things?
Yeah, so I think it's primarily about recruiting and outfitting your characters, and a lot of them. You end up with usually anywhere between 50 to 100 characters in terms of the space you can eventually have in there. So it's managing that capacity, the welfare of all these characters. There's also a full tech tree. So as you do actions in the field, you can earn research points and upgrade your technology, which will give you new supply types, potentially vehicles, other sort of technologies that can improve your operations. And then there's also a sort of a shop of sorts that I'll kind of avoid for spoiler reasons, that you get access to later in the campaign. So you're kind of, again, it's not dissimilar to like something like a Darkest Dungeon or XCOM, where you it's really about the characters. It's focused on the characters, and there's all these systems that help you support that. And I guess there's a very light, I think I mentioned this before, there's a light diplomatic layer where these visitors will appear in your HQ, and you have to figure out how to resolve them and meet their needs, or recruit them, or detain them, or whatever the situation might be.
Mm-hmm. And going back to what you said a few minutes ago about kind of classes and the cost of deploying them, that is another like very interesting dynamic that we normally don't see. Again, in XCOM, the cost really comes into the character getting hurt or killed, and you lose your utility.
Right.
Here, the cost is, if I spend, I don't know, like I don't know like what the currency rate is in the game, but if I spend like $2,000 to get this super powerful unit out, do I have enough money for the next mission or the mission after that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of the game is managing that, and if you, as a character levels up, their cost goes up, and so there's actually sort of a strategic decision of like, do I want to invest in a small set of units and have them do all the work and have them get really high level, but then get to be a pretty high cost, or do I kind of spread that out and have a lot of lower cost but kind of generally effective characters? But yeah, if go ahead.
I was going to say, and that's basically the Fire Emblem dilemma right there. Sink all your power into one unit, and then you realize, oh, everybody else is just useless now.
Yeah, and if that particular character for a particular mission isn't very effective, like you have a big diplomatic meeting, and so that character just doesn't have a lot of utility in a particular mission, then you've really got yourself into trouble. The way that the sort of economy works is you want to secure towns in the field, and they will give you sort of these we don't really have a term for it, but I guess like tributes, where they'll support your cause. So by securing these towns and doing actions to meet needs, they will give you more funds that you can use for future missions. And then certain objectives Like catching a wanted poacher, or a boss will give you additional things. So a lot of your choice in the field of what to do could be driven by your kind of meta needs, whether it's reputation, currency, or research. That will drive a lot of how you spend your time in missions and in the missions you choose to take on in the first place.
Yeah, and like getting like those resources and stuff like that. Besides like the diplomatic approach, I'm assuming completing missions will earn them. And something that you mentioned a few minutes ago, I just want to clarify here.
Mm-hmm.
With each era, like you're getting to choose between different missions. How, like, what is the, I guess, the strategic level in terms of choices between, do I want mission B versus mission C?
Yeah, so I think it will come down to so you do have some freedom within an era. So there will usually be more missions than is required to complete an era. So you kind of have to make trade-offs of what you spend time on and what you don't. The considerations there are usually how long is a mission. So if it's a bigger map and in a longer time, it's going to take more of your resources. So that's a consideration. And then there's kind of knowledge up front of what the rewards will be for a mission. So some of them will result in more research, some will result in more reputation, some will result in more currency. Generally, are the big factors. Other times it will be, hey, I know that this unit has, or this mission has a particular character that I might want to try to recruit, or that I want to take down because they have like a longer term impact on the citizens and stuff. So there's some considerations based upon your sort of upfront intel about where what types of things you want to do and how equipped you are to handle them.
Okay. And to Romanel, who just came to the chat, I guess they missed when we gave the little, I guess, bullet point about what We Are the Caretakers is. If you wouldn't mind, I guess, giving, for you, Scott, if you wouldn't mind giving like just the elevator pitch of the game again for people who just came in.
Yeah, of course. So it's a sci-fi game where strategy RPG where you're trying to protect animals from poachers. You are building squads from a variety of different classes, sending them out into a field to track down poachers, meet with the local communities and check on the welfare of the animals. And then once you do track down a poacher, your unit will kind of confront that unit in turn-based RPG style combat. And then in those encounters, you kind of have a choice between how you resolve them. It's not just trying to like beat them down physically, kill them and wipe them out. You have to consider how you can try to diffuse the situation in the correct way that will kind of help your long-term goal of protecting these animals over the course of the campaign.
All right. Now, another question that came in from Mr. Elrude. With having all these different team members, any considerations to avoid a situation where the player has one alpha team, which is the star of the show, and like if something bad happens to them, they'll just reload the game. The old XCOM, just keep reloading. We don't want to have anyone die.
Yeah, the sort of save scumming problem, I haven't decided yet how much I care about that. Like if somebody really wants to do that, they can. We can. I do think generally the game is about kind of dealing with challenging situations. So I think that's more of the direction of the game. But sorry, what was the original question?
About avoiding essentially having that one perfect team,
the one big
and then
unit,
never let anything bad happen to them.
Right. So I think the way that will be discouraged is how the opposing characters will react to you. So a system that I haven't really talked about in encounters is that there's this threat system. And so the actions you take will affect threats. So you can do things, if you take aggressive actions, it will kind of present you as threatening. You can also do things that calm the situation. But that that threat level has a big effect on the rest of the encounter. And most notably for this topic you're talking about, if you increase the threat too much, the units will flee from you. So if you have a really high-powered, threatening unit, you'll likely won't be able to take a boss down in time, and they'll get away. That type of thing. So that may work for a unit that's like not as like they are equally threatening of a poacher unit. So you're not going to be as concerned about them running away. But to accomplish a lot of things, they may not be a good fit. But yeah, the threat meter in general is interesting because you can be aggressive, but then it will potentially increase, say, the critical hit rate if things are too high, and that can really change the dynamic both in your favor and against you if you don't kind of take that into consideration.
Mm-hmm. And to Romanel's other question about like the balance of the skills, weapons, is there any kind of like delay, or I think probably not. I think from when I played the demo, but or is there any like cooldown, or I guess some kind of limitation to just having your characters use their best skills each round again and again and again?
There isn't, but a lot of the skills are affected by your character's state. So, some abilities will be like get a buff based upon your will level, for example. So, you may, based upon the character and your unit's current state, that may not always be the optimal choice. So I think there isn't anything necessarily like trying to stop you, but there may be situations where what's optimal is different. And again, the thing that's kind of balancing all of this is that cost layer. You've paid to have this like a highly effective unit, and hopefully that will balance out future choices.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of like class synergies and like bringing people into that, I guess, how are you approaching that, considering again that this is a passive combat system?
So the question's about like synergies between different units.
Yeah, like how would like different classes like interact with each other for either a synergy bonus, or how different skills will play off of one another?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of sort of traditional class archetypes that you'd imagine where, like there's a guardian class that will protect characters. There are, characters that will target all or just the front row, back row. So some of it is just about getting wide enough coverage of the various situations you might run into. And others are just a traditional sort of like buff, debuff, tank sort of setup. But there are, I guess the biggest place where synergies can happen are with the traits system. So the characters can have different traits, and they may help or have passive impacts on the other members in their unit. I think a lot of synergies are just built into those core systems. And we do literally have like a bond trait that specific characters will just have their performance increased if they're in the same unit together, things like that. But I do think there's explicit things like that, and then just more of like implicit parts of the system that just add synergies that you can discover.
Okay. And with like talking a little bit more on like combat itself, and just like I guess fighting these enemies, or just dealing with things along those lines. With the combat system being passive, or again being an auto battler system, what kind of philosophy are you going for in terms of enemy designs, and how will the enemies fight back against your teams?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like who they target. So they may equally kind of pick on a character that you weren't expecting. And they're also motivated by different things. They are a good example of a game that works this way is Into the Breach. where you see the enemies in that game they have very little interest in your actual characters. They are interested in the cities and taking down the power grid and so forth, right? And in this game, they are with depending on the mission, there may be slightly different objectives, but for the most part, when it's a poaching mission, they are interested in the animals. So they may just try to they're happy to flee and live to try to get their objective another day. They're willing to just try to debuff you, so you can't harm their leader or take the animal contraband that they have. So I think just your goals being different of you trying to detain them and them just trying to survive in the general case, or them just trying to foil your plans, I think is a good way to think about our enemy design. They are not they are usually less equipped than your units, but they have different motivations, and so they will take actions in a different way than just trying to meet fire with fire.
Okay. Now, going back to kind of like the persistent layer or the meta layer of We Are the Caretakers, you said a few minutes ago about that your ultimate goal or your ultimate fail state is for the extinction of the animals you're trying to protect. And going back to kind of the XCOM analogy, one of the challenges of these kinds of games is that kind of just the sliding scale or just the downward spiral effect. That if I lose this mission, it's going to make it easier to lose the next mission, then, 5-10 missions later, I am now hopelessly dead. That just one thing just screwed me up. With We Are Their Caretakers, I guess, how are you combating, or have you thought about kind of balancing, you want each mission to matter, you want those choices to carry over, but in the same vein, it's not, I lose this mission and now I am destined to fail 6 missions later.
Yeah, so this actually happens to be like the thing I am working on actively right now, because we're still, we haven't released yet. So I've been batting back and forth what we want to do, and I think ultimately we'll land on a system that is slightly less one-to-one. So it's not, you start with 50 Ron, and if you lose them all, it's a constantly counting down doom number, right? I think we may want to abstract it a little bit to something more akin to, like, say, the Into the Breach power grid, right? Where you never, there isn't a limited number of buildings in that game, right? It's just after a certain amount of sort of damage, you kind of get into a point of no return. But there are ways to restore that power grid, right? So in our game, the things that we're playing with right now are there could be animal births between eras. So based upon your performance and in other missions, and maybe certain communities will help you take care of the animals, and so we can kind of just justify why the number went up, kind of a thing. And then there can just be more direct ways to care for the animals, so that you can kind of promote growth and increasing that number as well. So yeah, I guess the long story is we definitely understand that design problem. We don't want to take away I think the theming of the game ultimately is hey, if we don't protect them, it's going to get worse and worse. So we don't want to lose that, but we also want, from a gameplay standpoint, to feel like you have direct sort of mechanical ways to improve your position for the most part. So hopefully that answers your question. It's definitely a design in flux, but I think that's a really smart thing to point out that we want to address before we release into early access.
Yeah. And it's always tricky with these kinds of games, especially with so many moving parts. And it's always been that challenge of kind of the XCOM, we have these different gameplay loops interacting with each other. And, if one goes out of sync, or if one becomes too dominant, it kind of affects the rest of the game.
Yeah, but I think that can be the case, and I do think that's something we think about of like, well, people will really like the meta part of the game, but they won't like the combat, or they really like the combat, but they're not as enthralled with like the RTS part. I think that's definitely been a design concern, but I think ultimately we are putting them together and showing the connections to how they all fit into this like wider metaphor of trying to command this organization at the 40,000 foot level and the micro level, right? And I think hopefully we can solve that. I think in terms of, I don't know, I guess your other question was more about like the loops, I suppose. Like,
Yeah.
was there something more like specific you wanted me to hit with that?
No, I was just kind of talking generally about kind of like balancing like two or three different gameplay systems.
Yeah, it's hard. It's work. It's why it's taken over 2 years to
Yeah.
this point. But I guess a lot. I think a lot of your questions have been about like, well, you've got this kind of passive system, so I'm worried that there's like not enough to do. There's not enough control, or that's a concern potentially, like looking at it from afar. But I think in order for something like that to work, you have to have like a lot of things to consider. And so I think the game would feel like you don't have a lot to do if there aren't a lot of systems to consider. So we feel like it's a core part of how the game will work, and we kind of have been up for the challenge. Now, I do think there aren't a lot of examples out there of games that are like this, where you're trying to have this sort of non-violent encounter system. You're protecting. Your goal isn't to go out and colonize everything and take the land and put things into your control. And I think really trying to get that right and has been a challenge, but I think it's what makes our game unique and interesting and fun to play versus a lot of the other strategy games out there that follow kind of traditional formulas.
hmm And the chat is discussing about kind of balancing out complicated design with making things more streamlined or easier to understand. And I think that's always a very interesting discussion for any kind of strategy game, or especially for a game that is unique in terms of its gameplay loops. And this is something I think I'm sure you've probably spent a lot of nights thinking about with We Are the Caretakers, about how, I guess, complicated do you want this game to be, and when does it get to that point where it just becomes like a sprawling mess of stats and numbers that are just going to completely overwhelm somebody?
Yeah, I've definitely thought a lot about this. So a lot of my work up until this point has been in like casual or casual strategy games, for lack of a better term. Like, and I've solved the complexity problem in different ways for each game. Something like Hero Generations has a lot of complex systems. You have generations of characters that you have to manage, and you have a giant open world that you can explore. But fundamentally, I solved the complexity problem by making it you have one character per generation to manage, and it's more of a traditional roguelike. And if I ever get overwhelmed, I just know right now I have a choice of 4 directions to go, and it's easy to kind of help the player kind of understand, like, right now in the micro moment, here are your choices, and as you make progress in those things, you can then start to concern yourself with other things. So I would say for We Are the Caretakers, I'm definitely allowing myself to open that up and allow for more complexity up front, because I do think a lot of the appeal of the game is the customization and the choice. When I think about Ogre Battle, the thing that really just captivated me is like every other RPG up until that point was something like a Final Fantasy III or a Chrono Trigger, where it's like you have like 4 characters in a party, and maybe over the course of 80 hours you'll get 10 characters type of a thing. But in Ogre Battle, after you complete the first mission, it's like, okay, now you're in control of this revolution, and you have 60 characters that you're just plopped in your place, and oh my gosh, what are all these things? And it could be overwhelming, and it is for some people, but that's like the cool thing is just like it's almost like a Hearthstone deck building thing, right? Like I've got all these cards and I just want to inspect all of them and how can I fit them together in the right combination to like do something different and make it personalized to myself. So I want to keep that moment in our game, but also use the learnings that I've had from my other games to kind of help people understand things as we go. And I think ultimately the way that manifests is in our kind of prologue mission, where we kind of slowly introduce you to the mechanics with one unit, and then it opens up once you get past that.
Yeah. And it's something that we've talked about many times here on these streams, on these interviews, just the importance of onboarding, especially when you're dealing with any kind of unique or esoteric systems that somebody wouldn't exactly have that knowledge, from a previous game to get into yours.
Yeah, it's a problem, especially for anything that has some level of openness to it that ultimately becomes the appeal. So yeah, I think the way we've solved that is with playtesting. So we've gone to PAX twice. We've done a beta. To me, there's no better way to know if people like something than to like have them play it and tell you if they like it or not. So I would just say that we probably spent a year iterating on our onboarding process, and we hope to continue to do that up through early access. And the reason we want to do early access is because we know we have a lot of systems and we need more feedback and we need more people to play it deeply. So we are embracing early access because we think that's ultimately how we're going to get to the right balance of everything.
All right. As a quick time check, we are just about an hour in. I think in terms of questions, I think I may have maybe 15, 20 more minutes if that works for you.
Of course, yeah. Let's do it.
And for chat, if you have any questions about We Are the Caretakers, feel free to leave them in the comments there. So, one thing that we haven't kind of discussed a little bit more, or didn't get a little bit too involved in, but I kind of want to bring it up, was as you described the different eras of playing the game. Do the eras change any of the game systems, or is it simply more for thematic purposes?
No, I think they definitely introduce so let's see. So each era is sort of based around an event happening, whether it's a new faction's arrived, the one that's pretty I don't think it's that much of a spoiler, but at the end of the first era, the barrier that has been protecting your society, the Shadran society, comes down. And so you start to be confronted in future eras with some of the things and people that might be on the outside of the barrier. And so each era introduces a different thematic thing, and then each of those factions have unique character classes, different ways of poaching, and different challenges in the landscapes. So you'll see a different biome usually in the missions, and you'll see different mechanics and different enemies for the most part. And they all we feel like they could kind of come in different orders. We're still playing with that right now. So you can encounter each of these sort of scenarios, if is another way to describe it, in different orders. But ultimately, you'll interact with all the different peoples, and then it'll kind of all lead back to the kind of conclusion era of the game.
In this about conclusion, does the game, again, this could get into spoiler territory, but are there fixed encounters, quote unquote boss fight, or something the player must prepare for that will occur the same way on each playthrough?
There are a couple key beats we want to hit, but largely some of the inter-era events could be very different in terms of the order they come in. We might, I think for early access, we'll have fewer of these, at least when we launch in early access, but we hope to have different boss characters that you may or may not encounter. We may have certain missions that only appear based upon your reputation or characters you've recruited in previous eras. So there definitely will be some variation in the experiences, but the end game itself, I think it will have different ways of playing out, but I think it will be the same sort of the same overall scenario, but you will have different options at your disposal based on how you played the rest of the game.
Okay. And a question from Arlie in chat. Do you have any particular inspiration for the lore mythology, and do you consider lore an important part of the game?
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things, just because I my big contribution to the game is more of systems. I talk about that a lot, but I think the game definitely has a narrative a big narrative piece to it. And we spent, Zalavir and I primarily, but the whole team, really invested in world building up front. So we have a really clear idea of like what our world is, what the places are, what the peoples are. And, we really enjoy kind of exposing that. And I think aspirationally, one of the things you'll get from replaying the game or having this variety is you'll run into different sort of secondary bits of that lore as you play the game and decide to choose different missions over the others. You'll sort of develop a more complete understanding of the world. So I think the story is really strong. At least the people who played the beta have highlighted that they're really interested in the kind of interpersonal intrigue and the overall scenario. And I do think that there's a lot of like depth to explore if that's your thing.
Okay. And kind of following up on that in terms of like the lore and the aesthetic of the game, I guess.
Yeah.
We mentioned earlier about kind of the Afro-futurist kind of aesthetic. Was that something that you kind of keyed in very early on in development, or did that again come about through designing and iterating?
I think we definitely had a clear thought that we wanted to have a diverse cast, and we wanted to have a fictional landscape that still felt rooted in the real landscapes that were our inspiration. So I think all of those factors led to us kind of discovering Afrofuturism, saying, hey, this is a great fit. The second part is just Anthony Jones, our art director, is just incredible. And the concepts he put together for the character designs just inspired kind of what the world would be. So I think it's definitely our own world, but I definitely think the existing examples of Afrofuturist works really inspired us to kind of like that would be a fun thing and appropriate thing to do for our game. And it's something that hasn't been done in games a lot, if at all. And we felt we could execute on it with, Zalavir and Anthony and a lot of the other members of our team who are really passionate about that.
Mm-hmm. And Roman out in chat is asking about kind of like tiers of progression. From when I played We Are the Caretakers, I saw, of course, we mentioned, of course, the character systems. There is the kind of quote-unquote tech tree of the game as well. If you could clarify a little bit on that.
Yeah, so just clarify a little bit on the tech tree or just progression in what?
Yeah, progression. Yeah.
In general, okay. Yeah, I think I definitely am a student of Sid Meier and all those games, and the one more turn aspect, and I think what drives that is just always feeling like, oh, there's just if I just play one more mission, I'm going to get enough research to get this technology I wanted, or oh, I know that the boss is just 2 missions away, or this character is going to level up in a mission. And so just understanding to always kind of have something to look forward to and something to be working towards is pretty key. And I think the character progression plus the tech tree plus just the overall mission progression is and the character collecting are all those things that drive that. The tech tree itself is, I think, because of the overall complexity of all those things, is fairly stripped down. It's really about choosing between a couple different paths. So we've kind of broadly broken down the categories of technologies to capacity. So increasing the number of units you can have, the classes you can pursue, the things that are in your HQ like the shop, that sort of thing. There's character welfare, so increasing their stamina, healing them, better equipment, so forth. And then there's just like general technologies from the other factions that gets really fun because it just opens up a lot of different play styles.
Okay. And to Romano's next question about yes, the game is built on errors. Does it have an ecosystem like in Don't Starve? I don't think that's what you're kind of aiming for, but I'll let you explain.
Yeah, it's not like one big world with lots of effects on each other. So I don't think it's that. I do think I do think the state of like your Ron population or the choices you've made may affect how successful certain missions are that deal with that. The other this isn't really what he's after, but there's definitely a dynamic that we discovered that we built into our missions of human animal conflict. So one of the early missions in the game is like there's Ron that are kind of running amok in a farming area. And so there's territories that have farms, and if the Ron are on them, they'll kind of destroy the crops, or they might get into trouble with the citizens. So we have these sort of like ecosystem or interactions on the maps, but they're fairly discrete versus being like a big living system across all the missions.
Mm-hmm. And to Mr. Elrud's question, how long? I think you may have answered this earlier, but people may have still coming in. How long was the development cycle for Will We Are the Caretakers have, and can you compare it to the Heroes development time?
Yeah, so we've been a little over 2 years now. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little over 2 years. We hope to go into early access in the fall here, probably the give or take September-ish timeframe, and then we're going to stay into early access until we feel like we're ready. So we're tentatively planning to do our like 1.0 sometime in 2021. If things are going well earlier, if we feel like we need more time later. And so yeah, we have plans to actively develop the game with the community, and we would really love to have you guys join our Discord and be a part of that from the start. And that's discord.gg/We Are the Caretakers if you'd like to do that.
All right. I guess questions wise, I just have a few. Before we get into kind of like our wrap up, I just have a few more for you. So one
Sure.
thing that I wanted to ask for sure, and this is something that you brought up earlier, is about kind of the animal preservation, or protecting animals from poaching and kind of doing research on that end. I guess, could you go into a little bit more detail about kind of like the research you guys did, and how did that affect We Are the Caretakers?
Had a really big impact because we didn't feel like we could approach this topic if we didn't bring in the people doing the real work, and to have people on our team and in our advisory team, that have the lived experience, to make this work and to be authentic. So from the start, we have had some advisors from major conservation charities and things that we've talked with, gotten a lot of ideas for, learned from just done interviews with to learn about their experiences, interesting situations. And those have definitely inspired a lot of the missions and how our encounter system works, for example. And I don't want to get too deep into this because we'll be talking about this much more in detail closer to early access, but we definitely took some research trips to kind of support all parts of development. So we've learned a lot about how they operate and how certain places have had very, very successful anti-poaching programs and where others have failed, and built that into our game so that when you make good choices or bad choices, they map to kind of how all of these things, and all these considerations, work in the real world too.
Mm-hmm. I guess without getting anything, I guess, too detailed or possibly too graphic, anything that, like, as you went with these conservation or these preservation societies, like anything that like stood out or surprised you that kind of made its way into the game, or just change your worldview on things?
Yeah, there's quite a few. It's definitely interesting. I'm trying to think of like, it's such a broad topic, and it's really worth your time to explore it. But I think one of the things we I think that most like kind of got our whole team kind of inspired to like really be passionate about making a game about this is just seeing just how like how little a lot of the poachers care about the animals. Like they don't think about them
Mm-hmm.
as living creatures, or like you'll a lot of the reports you find is like it's not just like we've got some horn, like they don't even kill the animal, they'll just like take it down and like leave it there with its horns removed, without it still alive. It's like just really really terrible ways that this plays out. And so we tried not to make the game too like graphic, but there are definitely like things in the game where we highlight that, where it's not there's some realities to it that we wanted to bring into the game and wanted to make people aware of, so that they understand why it's kind of important to sort of at least be aware of it and hopefully help. The other thing I just wanted to say, like, it was surprising to me how little resources these organizations have that are doing the work. Like, they just don't have a lot of the equipment, they don't have a lot of people, and they have incredibly large landscapes to patrol. So in a lot of ways, they have a very dangerous and difficult job, and that comes into our game too, where it really comes down to this high level resource management and trying to figure out how to solve this problem without a lot of the stuff you need.
Are there any websites or online resources you could recommend for people to look up if they're interested in learning more about this?
Yeah, well, we hope to have the game be a resource when it comes out, to like, just highlight in a very passive way with news feeds. That's a good question. There are a lot. So I've just accumulated a lot of research materials by following various wildlife conservancies and things like that. I just kind of like keep track. So if you can look up some of them, I don't want to like recommend any individual one because there's so many. But if you come to our Discord as we get closer to early access, we'll probably make that a part of our conversation and share those resources.
Okay. And another question from Mr. Elrud. When you're talking about realism and good versus bad choices, how are you approaching recovering from a mistake that the player makes?
Yeah, so there are definitely systems that allow you to kind of reset. So there, like, fundamentally, there's always like, when you return from a mission, there's always a stream of new recruits available for you in the we call it the atrium, but it's like kind of the visitor point in the HQ. There are I think certain missions, like let's say you get behind on raw numbers or you get behind on funds, you can make decisions to pursue a mission that meets that goal. There's also, so in our campaign, they're not just field missions. There's something we call story missions, where it's just like a quicker mission that's handled in the HQ, but you have these like big choices. And so this is where we do a lot of these like big moral or big weighty choices, where we can get into kind of the details of things. And that's usually a point where, the choices you make will give you different resources or allow you to kind of like adapt to the direction you want to go for your strategy. Those are the two that come to mind, but I'm sure there's a lot of other ways to recover.
All right. So before we go into kind of like our wrap up or kind of ending the cast, any other aspects of We Are the Caretakers that we didn't discuss, whether from a design standpoint, development, etc.?
I think we hit a lot. I think the only other thing is that we are going, as much as possible, we want you to be able to play the game in the way that you want to. So if you're not as, if you don't want as much choice in encounters, you can do the auto battle system. If you do, you'll hopefully have the option to, make some of those micro choices. And likewise in the campaign, the biggest thing I want to point out is that we have like a full campaign, but then we'll also have sort of a scenario mode where you can just kind of go into a mission, play for a longer time towards victory conditions, that type of thing. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that if there's some part of the game, whether it's narrative or combat, that feels like that's not typically your thing, I would encourage you to give it a shot. But if not, we are going to try to offer lots of different ways to play the game so you can enjoy it the way you want.
All right.
But other than that, we've been talking for a while. I appreciate you spending so much time talking about the game.
Not a problem. Again, for people who are watching, they know we can spend a lot of time talking about design here on these casts. So, with that said, I guess to kind of wrap things up, some I guess logistics related questions for you about the game. So, the version that I play, this was about I want to say 2 maybe 3 months ago, and that
Mhm.
was during the second to last Steam festival. So, where is the game at? I guess right now, and kind of like what are your plans for getting it out for people watching?
Yep. So uh, we finished our beta, which was a part of the last Steam Festival, and that was kind of a preview of the first, like a single era of the like 4 to 6 era campaign we're hoping to ship. We are working actively towards early access release in Q3 or the fall of this year. And you can wishlist on Steam and join our Discord to get updates. I post like a daily devlog, and our team tries to chat as much as possible. Um, yeah, and then I think the other thing we announced in our more recent trailer is that we are working on a console version, but that will be a part of our like 1.0 version in 20, next year sometime as well. But we are consoles are in our plan.
Okay. In terms of, I guess, where the game is at now, are there any major systems or things that haven't been implemented yet that you're hoping to kind of, refine and polish for early access or throughout early access?
Yeah, there's so many ideas for things that we want to have in the game. So trying to get to that, level of stuff that we need is a big concern right now. I think the biggest thing that we're working on is that like HQ shop, because we do think outfitting and giving you those supplies is interesting, and it's a touch point to interact with some of the other factions in your HQ. And then yeah, I think the tech tree and upgrade systems are like where most of my brain power is being put right now to really make sure that that progression system delivers, because I do think that's really the where the core fun comes from, of like, oh, I can't wait to like upgrade this character and level them up, and I want it to be satisfying. I want there to be really cool abilities for that class and so forth. So I would say, yeah, that's where most of our work is going to be done, and I think again we're going to be sharing that work with the community, and we'd love to get everybody's feedback on if those are actually looking exciting.
All right. So I think that is everything that I have for you for today, Scott. So to end the cast on, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to say to like fans watching this?
Yeah, I just hope you'll give our game a chance and check it out. My goal with Heart Shaped Games has just been to try to make meaningful and memorable games, and sometimes that is taking a chance on a design that's different. I think the game is interesting, but I think it'll be a fun journey to work with the fans to deliver on this really interesting space. I just love playing with new design spaces, and it's sometimes not always easy and takes time. But we would really just love for any strategy game fans to join us, take a chance on it, and if you're not enjoying it, or if you feel you can find ways to improve it, let us know, because we want to make it good. But other than that, just please follow us on social media and wish list, and all those things help a ton as well.
All right. So I think with that, we will end things for our cast today. Sky, it has been a pleasure hanging out with you. And again, thank you for agreeing to come on and getting in touch. And yeah, definitely best of luck with We Are the Caretakers. And hopefully in the future, we can maybe do like a sit down play of it with you on, kind of talking about the design, while I hopefully try not to fail too badly while we stream it.
Yeah, no, I would love that. And thanks so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
All right. So, for the people watching, oh yeah, if you wouldn't mind hanging on the call for like 30 seconds after we hang up, we'll have just a few wrap up. But for the people watching, we're going to end the cast here. So thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're enjoying this live or recorded. If you want to follow me, I am on Twitter at GWBlazer. There are links to our Discord and Patreon linked down below. Patreon supporters can get access to early and ad-free versions of these casts that we do. And if you are a developer working on a game, teaching game design, or just want to talk a design topic with me, we are always looking for a future guest, so please get in touch. For you, Scott, are there any social media, sites, Twitter, whatever, that you like to plug before I let you go?
Yeah, you can follow me at Brodie Games on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. And then at Caretakers Game, which is the game account. And then, yeah, again, on our Steam page, you can find all the places where the game is going to be available at wearethecaretakers.com.
All right. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could mention your Discord. Again, I'll include a link to it down below in the record version, but for your Discord channel, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you should be able to join if you go to discord.gg/wearethecaretakers.
All right. So, with that, everybody, we are going to end things here. I will be back later tonight for